Hello, world, and welcome to Creating Light with Kelsey. We have another guest on the podcast, Bri Deemer, and she is a retreat leader and somatic coach based out of Hawaii. Bri is on a mission of opening up heart chakras through somatic experiences. Being a somatic coach with 18 years of bodywork and Reiki behind her is nothing short of powerful, calm, and clear. Her presence and embodiment practice is regularly put to practice through being a mother, free diver, and avid somatic experience seeker. Bri has gone through a lot of change, grief, and triumphs in her 37 years of life, which has allowed her to have depth that many don't experience until their 50s. Bri loves bringing this depth to you through her work, and she invites you to experience a transformation of stepping into your shameless power while having fun. Welcome to the show, Bri.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Yes. Hello,
Um,
hello.
I love I love just getting together and chatting, you know.
Yeah. We just show up and hang out and talk, but then that's kind of cool of like having friends in the practitioner space too. Like this gets to be like this, where we show up. This is something that stuff we would normally talk about, but then it's also something that we can offer for other people to listen in on too.
Yes. Yeah. So, you just reminded me of something that I heard at my last retreat. The ladies were talking about how they said so much of what was offered opened up spaces within themselves. Everybody had a release, they had a crying moment, a laughing moment, this moment of feeling super expansive. But then one lady shared, she goes, another part of it that you don't talk about, but that happens naturally is just in the conversations when we're all gathering. She's
Hmm.
like, so many of my aha moments were just like when we were driving to go see this, or when we were visiting over meals, or when we were visiting in ceremony a little bit. And like, I was like, oh yeah, I was like, that's something that naturally happens. But being part of circles for so long, I kind of forget to share that when people are new
Hmm.
into coming into these circle spaces or gatherings or retreats, that there's these times, like if you love podcasts, you're going to find that in those communities.
Yeah, there's so much medicine in that, in just the
Yeah.
conversation itself.
Yeah.
Well, you and I met in our somatic activated healing training. So we
Yeah.
were cohort two. That's how we met. Um, I don't remember you being on a lot of the live calls. I can't remember if that's because of time
Yeah.
thing.
It was a time thing. My live calls, I felt like I got every third or every other.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that's how we met. And but she's been in the somatic world for a little while, but we'll get into that a little bit. Before we go any further, we are diving into topics that are a little bit more sensitive. So, topics of death, grief, domestic violence. So, this is your trigger warning now if you want to continue listening to this episode. But this is also one of the many reasons why I appreciate you and our friendship because you have that ability to go this deep and to talk about topics like this that one is not necessarily talked about publicly very much or to the depth that you're able to hold space for. And so I love that we can have this conversation on this podcast. But so for the listeners, know definitely trigger warning. Be mindful of your space, your body, tend to your needs as you continue to listen. But first, official question. What does soul liberation mean to you?
Oh, yes. This is one that has shifted a little bit and grown as I've grown, but lately it's been really coming into play. And I was sharing with somebody that I was like, I just feel super giddy and blissful lately. And it's not that I have no substances. It's literally just me being me and really being grateful and present where I am in life. And part of that comes from my perspective with the liberation. And I've always had little goals, but it's more been how I feel. And to really realize that I'm at this point in my life that my younger self really had dreamed and hoped for
Mm.
is really liberating. But it's been having me ask, like, what does that mean? And so I've come to the conclusion that I think it's just fully accepting where life is and feeling comfortable expressing yourself. So it's you being your full authenticity, but also having this profound sense that no matter what's going on, it's going to be fine. Like your car doesn't start one day, it's going to work out, even if it's stressful in this moment. You have to move. You're going to create a home again. It's going to be okay, even if you don't want to move.
I think I was
you
just
know?
laughing at that. Like, oh yes,
Yeah, or
that's
you
the
get
kicker, right?
fired, it's going to be okay. You're just going to have to find another job and a new routine. But that's one thing that I love about the somatic work we do is like when you really find this home space within, it's keeps everything from falling apart. Because if we feel safe on the inside and we know how to return into that space, then everything else is just a chapter.
Hmm. And when things seemingly fall apart on the outside, it's like the inside, that's what's always okay. Like we get to
Yeah,
adapt, adjust, feel, have the capacity to experience it all with like what you said and not being taken out every
yeah,
time. We just get to be with it all.
yes. And then you create that safe space to be fully expressive.
Hmm.
And so many people have to work for that. Very few of us are raised in homes or environments that allow us to comfortably speak everything, comfortably show every emotion. And then we go into life choosing different partners, different friends. But when you get to this space when you can feel something and you can just acknowledge it without having to hold it back, without having to filter it, you know, being able to truly express yourself goes into that self-liberation.
Because that's where disease comes from.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's the starter point. We're just shoving everything down. It ripples from there and becomes a pattern of we live, we shove things down, and then what? What happens from there?
Right. Right. Yeah, it can be a lot. It's you hear about this, especially when you work with clients about, somebody just spends 10 years just nonstop working and taking care of their family, but they don't ever pause to be like, how am I feeling? Or every time they drive to work, there's this dread and they don't ever pause to be like, is this worth it? What if I just look at another job? You know?
Mm-hmm.
Or if somebody falls into addiction, you spend years covering what's hurting you, but then when you come out of it, you also have to process those years because your body just shut down to survive. Yeah.
That becomes the whole unraveling process.
Yeah.
So, with this path of healing, what brought you specifically into the path of guiding others and being with them along their healing journey? And what right now are you really loving about what you're doing?
When I was younger, I had big dreams of being a surgeon.
I did not know
My
that.
5-year-old self was like, yep, we're going to be a surgeon.
What?
And then of course, I went into the whole like dancing phase. And the dancing thing stayed to about like beginning of high school. And then there was a point where I was like, okay, I'm not going to go to school to be a doctor. Not going to go to dance because I'm pregnant. And at some point in between these years, it had occurred to me that what I really love is not making, but helping people feel comfortable in their body.
Mm,
And I acknowledge that I also love just sharing this little sliver of joy wherever I'm at. And as this developed more, there was a clear point when I was like, oh, I just want to help people feel comfortable in their body. Like I have this sense of feeling really comfortable in mine. I want to help other people feel that because I see how it really serves me. And massage therapist was introduced to me. I met this massage therapist. I really liked her, so I started looking into massage therapy school. And then within my first couple years of doing massage, I noticed people were having huge emotional releases on my table, like where they would be crying, they'd be shaking, or somebody would just share this huge traumatic story and then be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know why I just shared that." And I would be like, "It's okay. Like, your body sometimes need to release stuff, and sometimes your voice is that." And then I'd always remind them if you find yourself stuck on this or if you find yourself coming back to this over and over, like please seek out a therapist and here's some in our community. So when I acknowledged that I was starting to have that happen, I got more trauma informed education with my continuing ed with massage because I was like, I know this is going into the fascia, the body, and I know I do a lot of Reiki work also, but there's something more that I need here to help my clients. And then about, 15 years into doing massage, I was like, yeah, the fascia holds memory. And
Mm.
then, those books came out of like The Body Keeps the Score. You have Gabor Mate and everybody like popping up more. And then there was a point where I was like, okay, what I'm helping clients do when they're on my massage table, yes, there's the classic, let's release your muscles, let's rehabilitate you. I worked in a chiropractor's office for a while, major chronic pain. And when you rehabilitate people through that, you really see these cycles that the human body carries. And what just kept coming back to me was like, our body holds so much memory, and so much of this is literally like inner fascia. And then I would also see that when I did heart chakra work on people, it allowed like their fascia and their body to like release this almost instantly.
And what's that heart work?
The heart work is my spiritual beliefs tell me that the heart work is our connection between our body, like our spiritual body and our human body. And when that gets really murky, then we fall into this lack of feeling safe or connection, or, you know, it might be when you find somebody being like, oh, I've gone through so much, like I don't remember who I am anymore. Or this has changed me so much, like I don't feel like myself anymore. And it's like, no, you're still yourself. It's just things have gotten murky on the inside. And when I started seeking out how to share this type of medicine in a larger group and in a different way than just one-on-one clients with massage, because I love massage therapy, but there is a time where you have to step back from working your body like that with others and shift it. And, I'm not sore in my body. I don't have anything going on with like my wrist or my neck or my back. And so I'm like, well, now's the time to filter in other things. So I still do massage, but it's very privately. It's a little bit more everything interwoven. And when I was looking for another modality, Saudi Simone came up with a somatic activated healing.
Mm.
And so I just kind of was following him, and I just tucked it away, and I was like, okay, universe, give me a little bit, some more feels in here. We're gonna see if this is right. But I have a feeling that whatever's going on here is what I'm also tapping into when I work with clients who need a big release. I've had people come into my massage practice that were just heavy with life, just so heavy, and like inflammation or really major chronic pain, a lot of fibromyalgia, a lot of just like the same injury or same area kept getting hurt. And then they would shift. And it was amazing to watch their whole life shift after having these breakthroughs. And so when somatic practice came my way and the somatic activated healing, I literally met somebody who went to school with Saudi Simone, and she was like,
What?
yeah, we met. And then she told her, we started sharing our life stories because we were doing like this photo shoot together. And she smiled at me and she goes, the persona that he has on social media, she's like, that's how he is in real life. And so instantly I was like, that's what I was looking for. I was like, because, I want to give my money to people who are authentic and people who
Right. We
are
don't
real and are
need
just
any
showing up.
more, we don't need to
Yes.
be contributing to
Yes.
facades and all of
Yes.
that. That's something that Lena said too. Like when
Yeah.
Lena met him in person, she was like, he's exactly who he says he is.
Yep. 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 And so I have not met him in person, but that was enough for me.
Hmm.
And now what I see it's tapping into a very, very similar thing, and it's powerful. And every time I see a client like have that breakthrough where they're kind of crying and you can literally see that their body relaxes, that there's this emotional release. But then I love seeing how it affects their family and their community. And it's not even that they're doing anything. It's just that we as humans co-regulate. And so when one of us feels really good in our nervous system, that like filters out to everybody around us. And it doesn't matter if it's the mom or the dad or the child or the grandchild. It just takes one person in every family to really learn how to be fully expressive and authentic, but respect people's thresholds. So when you respect people's thresholds, that means you can go visit your grandparents who maybe are hard to be around because they haven't caught up with the new times.
Yeah.
Or maybe you visit your, dysfunctional somebody in your family, but you don't get triggered by them because you respect their threshold. But yet you showing up in a regulated nervous system, being able to express yourself, being able to have these tools like that helps them just by you being by them because we're all frequency.
I think that was the biggest shifts in my own personal healing journey was realizing what I think is helpful as far as like trying to tell my parents what to do and how to heal and how to do this and trying to be an inspiration in that way, in an external way of like giving resources or all of that, or trying to tell them through words how I've changed, wasn't doing anything. It wasn't doing anything. It was making stuff worse. And it wasn't until landing deeper into acceptance and then back into unconditional love of loving them for who they are, how they are, respecting that threshold, then things started to shift. Like after that, integrated more. Then all of a sudden, they're coming to me wanting to build a different connection and more having the conversations that I wanted to have, but they kind of forgot about it because years had passed, but then they organically brought it back up. But it's because of the internal shift, like you said, that co-regulation. Like all you have to do is just worry about that and watch it ripple out. Like you don't have to physically be doing anything else to see change, especially within family lines.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
It's really powerful, but yet it's really just subtle. And it's gentle, honestly, in a way too.
Mhm. Yeah. So with the somatic releases or things that you're noticing, now how do you bring in more somatic work into what you're doing and how you help people?
When somebody works with me one-on-one, there's a whole process of integrating somatic class along with I do reiki, and then there's journaling because this personal awareness is so important. And I also do a lot of like one-on-one support because of like what we talked about earlier. A lot of things happen when you can just talk to somebody about whatever. But it's not talk therapy. It's literally just holding that space for expression.
Mm.
So it's like text me anytime or message me anytime. Like, how do you want to stay in contact while you're feeling all these new things? Because when you're able to share these little aha moments or just talk about something weird that you can't talk about weird with somebody else, it helps you integrate it into your entire being. And so much about healing is integration. And so the one-on-one or somebody comes to the retreat, um, I have it both set up where you get a lot of support and a lot of ongoing support. And that looks like, after the retreat, there's 4 weeks of us continuously meeting online and doing a saw class or somatic class within that container. And what this does is all of the people who went there are comfortable talking already about their little breakthroughs or the odd things that we start to feel when goes on. It's like, oh, that's a weird dream. Who am I going to talk to about? But if you don't talk to anybody about that weird dream you had, then you're not integrating whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. It
And
just comes up
yeah,
and then falls back into the
yeah,
unconscious.
yeah. And so I've learned that I like to hold my practice in a way where, yes, you are literally going to learn somatic activated healing with me, and you're going to see how it makes you feel different. You're going to feel the impact of it. I'm going to give you some tools about journaling, about energy work. I'll go into literally somatic stuff with the body because I've done massage for so long. And I'll share that frequency perspective too, which is powerful when you start to feel everything come together.
Mm.
But one big, big piece that I know is different than what I see with a lot of other options in the healing world is that there's this very personal, authentic piece of me holding space for you longer than just that immediate meeting.
Yes.
So the retreat, we have 4 weeks of ongoing. And then if somebody just shares things or writes me, like I still chat with them. I've never just disappeared. And then the one-on-one container. That one started a little smaller originally, and then I was like, oh, we're going to expand it to 8 weeks because I feel like 8 weeks really creates a cycle within us as humans. That one, you really get to be a little deeper, a little more personal, and it's targeted for people who maybe aren't able to fully get away and go on a retreat,
Mhm.
but you're still getting everything you would learn in a retreat. And then I had the retreat designed to where it's like, yeah, immerse yourself. You can take about a week off and let it unravel, like have an amazing experience here in Hawaii. I'll have some coming up in Alaska and Washington too. But it's like, yes, you have the time to take off. You can travel, but then to integrate it, there's additional time. And there's time even before. So the integration starts a little bit sooner.
That's totally needed. And you're right that
Yeah.
that's a big missing component in the healing space of that integration component is just here's a pop-up thing, here's a short course or program, and like good luck.
Yeah.
And it's just knowledge. It doesn't integrate into wisdom. It doesn't, it's from the headspace and
Yeah.
it's not that full presence to guide it into the heart space too.
Yeah.
It just is like, here's the
Yes.
information. Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like, it comes from the perspective of like, we really need to feel it all. And it doesn't mean you have to sit in your emotions and process it into words and then be so much in your mind again that you can
Mhm.
explain to everybody how you're feeling. That's not what feel it means to me. Feel it literally is I feel where this is coming from in my body. Like I can tell that I need to sleep. I can tell that I need to cry. I can tell that I'm angry. I can tell that like I'm feeling something I don't have a word for, but I feel it all over my body. you know?
Hmm.
Or
Yes.
just accepting like actually I feel nothing right now. There's something about just accepting whatever's popping up, whether you can put it in words or not, and not needing to feel the pressure of putting it into words,
Yes.
right? Because our American culture that most people that will probably hear this are living or in that area of the world is that there's so much pressure to label everything. And that's actually been one of my pet peeves like my whole life. I
Labels.
can't get over it. It drives me nuts. And so, one time there was even like when my son was probably about 12 or 14, I heard him like joking around with like labels, just labels that everybody says. And I was like, pause and I looked at him and I was like, Kelly, I was like, I was like, this hurts my heart a little bit. I was like, I'm going to be a little personal here. I was like, I grew you, I birthed you. And I was like, and now you're talking like this? I was like, I just don't understand. And he like paused and he like looked at me and he goes, oh, mom, he goes, you know, I know you don't talk this way, but if you look around, everybody around us does. And I was like, okay, I'm going to come back to this. And so I spent like a few times like looking around and I was like, wow, yep, I did not acknowledge that. I just was like, I don't like that. I don't like that. Ignore it. I don't like that. Ignore it. And I was like, okay, okay. So a lot of people do talk this way.
Talking in labels, you're saying?
Yeah.
Mm.
Because it's just like, it's always felt so like boxes, boxes and boxes. And like all these, like, if you do too many labels in your life, or you always need to explain things and have it like a little computer program in your mind, well, what happens? Then your mind can't come out of that and it's constantly needing to like fit everything perfect. But
Mhm.
in real life, in like the way the earth is and the way nature is, like when you really look at what's around you right now, like the trees, even the trim in your house, even the man-made stuff, nothing is perfect. So I think when people get stuck on labels or needing to like computerize everything or like file it away or have it be perfect, it's really that you're feeding this sense of control that humans always want because there's a part of us that's like, are we going to die? Are we going to live? This is going to kill us. This is not going to kill us. But if you learn to help your mind relax and you can do that through your body, then you're able to expand things more and really be in the present and really just appreciate what is going on. And
Mhm.
that's when you start holding space for those duality of emotions. that you don't see until somebody's done a lot of work, or that wisdom that our elders carry when they hold a lot of space for different people. That's when you can literally be grieving, but also be feeling immense love. It's when you can literally hate something that somebody did, but still love them. Or a lot of parents feel it with their kids when their kid really breaks something that you're going to have to spend a lot of money on fixing. And you're so angry, but like you still love them. And now you're just annoyed with all of it. There's a point when that annoyance goes into just accepting. And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
this is happening.
Well, with that topic of
Yeah.
duality and especially death, grief, and dying, that's something that you work with a lot with your
Yeah.
clients, processing that death, grief, dying. So, can you let us in on your experiences with that and key things that shaped you now because of death and grief?
I was originally born in Alaska, and there's just a lot of grief there.
Mm.
And I don't quite always know how to explain that, but I think it comes from the land itself. Like the land is very beautiful, but it's also very massive and rough. And with that, it's like, if you get stuck in the mud flats, you're not going to be able to get out. Even mooses get stuck there and die. If you are going mountain climbing and you get hurt and you didn't tell anybody where you're at, like there's not enough people there to like go out and be like watching, like so like you're used to other places. But also I think it's just the type of jobs that are up there and the way of life just opens the door to where you're not being inside all the time. You're not just doing your office work. And so it opens the door to where you're experiencing so much, you're connecting with the land more, but also people are passing away from that. And so with that, I always like to share, like I grew up fishing along this river with my family. And when you're a little kid, you don't go close to the river because the bank would sometimes just fall out. And so all us kids would play along like farther out. And if a kid got too close, an adult would like shoo them back. But every year somebody fell into that river, like once or twice. And all the adults would be sad and they'd kind of just, you would feel all the adults be sad. And then I remember us kids would pause for a moment and be like, oh, what's going on? And then somebody would be like, well, someone fell in, we can't go over there at all. And the adults would all kind of watch for them, but it's like the river is, muddy. It's brown, it's dark, and it is rough, and it takes things, but it also gives so much life because that's where we got our salmon from. And so I think my perspective with grief and death got a little bit shifted different because I grew up so around so much of that duality. Like literally the things that were giving us food or giving us safety at times would also take lives.
Wow.
So there was like this sad feeling, but also this happy feeling, right? Because it's like, that's sad that I know somebody just died, but at the same time, I'm having a lot of fun with like my friends. So I got to literally feel that duality. And then my father's originally from Mexico and South Texas, and the culture in that whole area, you regularly can talk about death and the people that you love that have passed, and you hold space for them in your homes. And that brings a different level of that too. And then when you have a fair amount of elders in your family who have dealt with a lot of death, I think you just get used to people talking about, like, oh, so and so has passed, or too bad so and so's husband passed, or, I didn't get a Christmas card from this person, means they must have passed, or so and so's spouse wrote me because this is the last card because they died earlier. So it just wasn't ever, death was never hushed around me. And my first big experience of losing somebody that I was close to, I'm the oldest of five, and one of my brothers, we share a different dad, but he had these aunts and uncles that were more like my cousin age, right? Because I played with them all the time. But they like watched over me. Like if I got scared, they'd like joke around with me. And they passed away when they were preteens, and it was devastating. But I remember being at their funeral, feeling how sad everybody was, watching everybody cry. And I can still think of like how devastated their mom was because she lost two kids in one moment and they were like the babies of the family. And that shifted their whole family. But I was so young, and they say when we're so young, we're, energetically, we're still connected to the other side a little bit. There's not such this veil or this concept of how we should or shouldn't be. And so I clearly remember thinking, like, well, why is everybody so sad? Like, I know they're not here, but I still feel them. Like, I could still feel their presence around me when I did different things. And that sense has never fully left me. So when somebody has passed, I'll still feel their presence around. And then as I've gotten older, I've been able to lean into the comfort of hearing they're having messages from somebody, rather it comes through my dreams or like a quick vision. And that has led me to the thing of like, if you really honor death as just a passage and that it is just the cycle of everything around us, then I think it allows you to lean more into loving and forgiving and being extremely present and intentional with your life.
Mhm.
So instead of living like there's no tomorrow, you're living like today is truly a gift. So when your family says hi to you, you're really taking a pause and genuinely looking at them and saying hi. When your friend reaches out to you, you're not just like, oh, I'm busy. You're like, oh, hey, I love you. I'm really busy right now, but I'll get back to you. Like there's literally this presence that I see when people have dealt with more grief and they're able to expand from it versus getting stuck in it. And what I see over and over again that I feel in myself, but I have seen in others, is the amount of grief you've experienced is equivalent like to the amount of love and magic you will feel in this world. If you know how to allow it to change your life, allow it to change who you are. Because, I'm going to share in my 20s, I actually lost my second love. And it was really impactful, but I couldn't process it right away. I acknowledged it. I didn't even go to his funerals. And I remember somebody was like, Bri, why don't you go to them? And I literally looked at them and I remember I was just like, I can't, I couldn't, I can't. And it took me a slow process of processing it. But what I realized that happened is around that time, I wasn't really, the people I saw regularly didn't know how to help me process that grief or hold space for it. When I first learned that they had passed, I was with somebody who was like, look, we're on a trip. I don't want this to wreck our trip. So, like, I don't want to deal with you crying. And I was
Ugh.
like, and I paused and I looked at them and I remember thinking, I was like, what is wrong with this? I
Yeah.
was like, I'm not saying it's going to wreck our trip. I'm saying, give me a moment to let me cry. But
Mm.
because somebody so strongly said that next to me that I had loved at that time, I think it like put this closure on it immediately in a subconscious way. And then it was also a big blow to my own heart and my life. And, my, for me, it was like one more person that has witnessed my life, but also me as like a mom, like over half the people that really witnessed me as a mom in that like intimate, quiet way, over half of them have gone now. And at that time, I had already lost a lot of other close people. And then when the second love had passed, I just remember thinking like I went into that little numb space you can do when people go into grieving, and then you just kind of like let life happen.
Mm.
And so even though I didn't have anything horrible thankfully happen, I did have this unnecessary little chaos things that I could have managed slightly different or that I could have flown through a little bit different. And instead it was like I spent a good few years of just free diving and riding my horse all the time. And that was wonderful. But at the same time, like I don't really remember who I dated during that time. I know the man that I was with who couldn't hold space for me when my second love had died. Like, you know, shockingly, him and I went separate ways.
Wow. Who would have thought?
But and so, but it's like life stuff happened. But I also see how I got a little bit stuck in that grief. And then what it did is, thankfully my outlet was a lot of movement
Mhm.
because, and I didn't go into like a substance because that's really easy to do. But I still was numb for a little bit to where I don't remember a lot of that time. And because I had a child, at some point I actually apologized to him and I said, Kelly, we've gone through so much grief. I was like, I'm sorry if you ever didn't feel I was super present with you. Like, I've always tried to do the best I can, but I acknowledge how there's a couple chapters where I know that I don't fully remember them, which tells me I was slightly shut off. And he just kind of laughed and he goes, yeah, we have dealt with a lot of death.
Wow.
And so that is something that I'm like so passionate about is I've been on all sides of it where somebody has passed and it's been easy to process. Somebody has passed. I had a best friend who his fiance passed, and then not too long after that, her mom went. And that was a lot to process. But in that scenario, it was easier to help my friend process and then process my stuff a little bit with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then when you have like a very close lover pass, like that shifts something in you. And it's not, it, being on all sides of it has given me the conclusion that grief is meant to be shared. And when we don't share it, or when we're in spaces where people don't know how to allow us just to be grieving, like it takes a lot to just allow somebody to cry, like allow somebody to cry, allow somebody to fall apart, allow somebody to show up not as their best selves. Like don't expect somebody to be their normal self, and I've experienced that too, where somebody is like, well, you just seem so different, or I don't want this to affect things. And I was like, wait, I'm grieving. I was like, my nervous system's literally off because I've lost something that's been part of my life for so long. It's literally interwoven in who I am. And, but I held space for that person because I paused, because I felt myself getting angry, right?
Yeah.
And like for me, I know a trigger's coming when I feel all these different emotions at once. And then I'm like, okay, we're gonna pause.
Yeah.
And I remember I paused and I love this person. We're close now, but I looked at them and I was like, you know, I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm literally not going to be myself for a little while, but I will be back around to being what you're used to. I grow up being encouraged to shame my emotions, and I have worked really hard to feel and express everything. And so, in the last,
Is
let's
that
see.
so that's what you told him? It froze a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Now, that was another scenario where somebody wasn't able to hold space for me when I was dealing with immense grief. And in that scenario, I was able to tell the person, Um, I've worked really hard not to shame myself for my emotions.
Mm.
And yes, I'm different because I'm dealing with grief, which also affects my nervous system. I was like, but I will be back around. And I was like, and me acting different doesn't mean I don't like you. It's literally that I'm grieving.
Yeah. I think people are afraid of that change though, of
Yeah,
like accepting it because it's something that they couldn't control when it's someone else that has died. And then, but then
yeah,
now they are changed as a result. And then
yes,
just you can get frozen a little bit of like,
yeah,
I didn't want that to happen, but now it is. And regardless whether I like it or not, I am different.
right. Yeah. And I think so. One class I have that occasionally I run is embracing change because as I've gotten older, I'm like, okay, I think a lot of the times that I could have gotten really stuck or fell into addiction, I think because I've been able to process change well, it has kept me from doing that. So my healing time or that chaotic time where we do feel a little very different is like short windows for me. But emotional regulation, which somatic has been my main focus with that, really helped a lot. But also, literally, the concept of like when goes back to like when you can feel your inner world, then change isn't so scary because you realize like everything around you changes, but like there's parts of yourself that never change.
Hmm.
There's feelings that I have always had on the inside that never change. And it's because at some point I was given the tools to learn how to go inside, or I was allowed to do that. And having that autonomy, maybe,
Yeah.
like really has allowed change it's still hard, but it's not, it's just a chapter. There's something about like, yeah, I don't feel like my normal self, but this isn't forever. I know I'll be back to feeling where I feel really good.
Hmm.
And things do shift and change, but like you always are who you are.
Hmm.
And I think that's why there was that whole movement years ago on like connecting to your inner child or rewiring the inner child. It's that like that perspective you had on the world maybe as a kid or those little feelings you had, like you still have those your whole life because there's a piece of our emotions that are who we are because they're like our soul imprint in our body.
Yes. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the isolation factor with grief.
Yeah.
As you talked about, like it can be so easy for people to numb and shut down as those intense waves come up, and especially in the United States, the American culture, that is that. Like that's what I grew up on. So you having like multiple cultural perspectives and seeing and experiencing that duality. So that so definitely speak to that more of like what you've noticed about isolation, how that has
Yeah.
happened in someone's life when people die, and why do you think that happens?
Yeah. So the cultural thing is definitely another thing that has helped me, become who I am with this type of work. It's the elders in my family. One was my dad, Mexico and South Texas, and the other one was like from Germany. And she grew up during their whole hard process of history that affected the whole world.
Hmm.
But that isolation, so for me, I think it was unspokenly taught that when you see somebody isolating, you bring them into your circle. Like I remember specifically watching people in my family being like, "Oh, nobody ever says hi to that person over there. Like, let's like go say hi to them." And there was a lot of awareness of like, don't let your kids be around strangers. But it's just like if that person isn't having anybody say hi to them, like say hi to them. If you go to the same restaurant all the time and there's somebody alone sitting there eating, like say hi to them. There's
Yeah.
this inclusion piece that's so important in community because if everybody feels included, then you don't have people who are isolating themselves. And the isolation, it's okay if you feel you need to be isolated. It's okay if you have this moment where you literally just can't deal with anything because that is also part of how we process things. It's kind of like that cocooning
Hmm.
that we so metaphorically talk about all the time.
We do talk about that.
I know. But the other part of that is, when somebody is dealing with such immense grief that they're isolating, is that other people don't take it personal and they just let them go through what they need to go through, but still hold space for them or show up for them. And that doesn't mean that you're like pushing them to not feel isolated because it's an uncomfortable feeling. Uncomfortable emotions are okay to feel, they're just uncomfortable
Hmm.
and it's not going to last forever, right? But that's a big piece of it is I think people are so uncomfortable feeling uncomfortable
Yes.
instead of just being like, I feel uncomfortable, I don't like this, like, but this is here, this is where we are.
Yeah.
um when I have helped others go through immense grief, like there was a time where one of my close friends was going through immense grief and she literally could do nothing but cry. She did like, you know, barely wanted to even get out of bed. And so me and another friend just spent 2 weeks all together, just laying in bed with her and crying with her. And it wasn't that we were always crying with her, but that was part of it. And so from that experience, from being next to my dad when he was on hospice passing, from being there when like animals pass, from having like my own really close companionship animals pass, or people I love die, from seeing it happen as an accident to a natural process of life. It's given me the concept that like grief is very much meant to be shared.
Mm.
And so even the person who is isolating can still be sharing that grief by other people just being around.
Yeah.
And it's not that you're just dropping food off at somebody's door. It's like that you're allowing your presence to help their nervous system, is what you're doing on a science level.
Hmm.
It's literally that like your frequency is helping this other person's frequency be like, oh yeah, I can, I don't have to feel just this grief. There's all these other frequencies or emotions that I can still feel.
So what comes up for me listening to that, because I hear you. And in my
Yeah.
personal experience, when I've tried to be there, just be with someone in that,
Yeah.
and um, where, especially in my family, the tendency is very high to isolate on all, not even just grief, just in general.
Yeah.
And then someone pushes you away, though, when you're trying to just be with them,
Yeah.
and they completely shut you out.
Yeah. So I think it goes into like, you're respecting the threshold thing, but what I've learned is you don't stop sending the invite.
Mm,
So this goes into rejections and uncomfortable feeling,
hmm
but you still send the invite. And on a personal level, I've seen where that can really make people upset that they're like, oh, I'm inviting this person all the time and they never show up. Or they come and then they're like, oh, you're finally here, even though we've been sending you invites. Like, you
Passive
don't do any,
aggressive.
you don't do any of that. You just
Yeah.
don't do any of that.
Yeah.
And it's like literally you're just sending the invite or you're saying hi here and there. And if there's somebody who doesn't like visitors to their home, then that's why, think of like the great grandmas that would be like, oh, I'm just going to drop off this at your house. Like, you don't have to say hi.
hmm Yeah.
That's where those little things of community come in. And at some point, some of them got dibbed as being like nosy or rude or invasive, but there's a very fine line between, you know, community and then like a cult. And then there's a fine line between paying attention and being attentive versus being controlling and manipulative. And so I would say like that fine line comes into respecting the other person's threshold. But when somebody's really isolating, you can do it in gentle ways. It's not that you're gonna like show up at their house and be like, we're having an intervention.
Yeah.
That's startling that person's nervous system. But if you just say, hey, I can tell you don't want company right now. Thanks for sharing that with me, but I baked some extra food or I made some extra food for you. I'm going to drop it off. Or like, I know it seems like you're not wanting to be bugged right now, but nothing's required of you if you just want to come over and watch a movie with me. Like little things like that make a huge difference. But I think it might also go into the thing of if you're not taught how to share your space, then it adds another layer of feeling uncomfortable when heavy things hit.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're not used to being witnessed in all of you, if you're taught suppression, then
Yeah,
when death comes, it's like, oh,
yeah,
what do we do?
yeah. And that's where I strongly believe it takes one person in each family to be comfortable with their expression, and then it just kind of ripples out. And nothing, if you've had years and years or generations and generations of family having these cycles, it's not going to change in one huge generation. But what you're doing is that the grandkids, the great grandkids, the next generations will continuously get a little bit better. That's all you can ask.
Hmm
Like for me, one thing that I've always shared with my siblings is even though we were all loved, we were also very much let down in huge ways that have left wounds in all of us that we've gone to counseling for, that we've seeked, our own beliefs of healing for. And whenever one of us have had a hard time, including myself, what I've reminded my siblings and myself is that our children are never going to feel this deep sense of abandonment or loneliness that we have felt at times or that constant thing that we've had to constantly worry about our parents or feel bad for our parents, our kids aren't going to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's this loneliness in between breaking cycles that families or communities set up. And it just literally takes one generation of sitting in a bit of loneliness, a bit of uncomfortableness, and then you see a huge shift in the next generation. And so, like, I would say if you are that in between generation, one, I see you.
Yeah.
And two, it does get better, but just don't expect anything right away. And it's like you do your work so you can be fully expressive and feel good. Even just waking up in the morning or drinking a cup of coffee makes you happy, like you're doing something right.
Mhm.
If those little things start to ignite you, your nervous system is really feeling good. The people that are around you that might not have the threshold to allow you to witness all parts of them or to allow you to be there for them in a way that you know would help them. Just do the little things you can and know that that's enough. Because
That,
it also comes back to you taking the pressure off of yourself and just showing up as you are, but also respecting somebody's threshold. No, there's like that balance there.
yeah. I mean, this goes into the next question since we've already been talking about it. But if there's any other ways that you know of or that come to mind of ways that provide genuine support in someone who is grieving. So we talked about the isolation, showing up, respecting the threshold, but anything else?
This is something that I've talked about with some friends that have dealt with a lot of grief. And there's something so nice about having people who show up that don't try to that they don't try to tell you how you're feeling or how you should be feeling, but they're just like being present for you. And that can be hard if you haven't seen that happen before, but being present for somebody is just being around them or saying hi or literally saying, I don't know what to say, but if you ever need to text somebody or you just want to grab lunch or literally just have somebody come do your dishes, like, I'm here for you. Because there's this thing that when you're going through immense grief, like, and I might cry here because it makes me so upset. And you hear it all the time. Like it's such a normal thing because we want people around us to feel okay.
Hmm.
Like when your nervous system's not super regulated and it's triggering little things in you, when somebody's going through something hard, it triggers things in you. So you want them to be okay. So you'll be okay.
Right.
Right. But if you come from it from the perspective of like, it's okay to fall apart, it's okay to feel immense grief, it's okay that you might feel uncomfortable watching somebody go through something really heavy. And guess what? It's okay if it triggers a little bit in you because in the long run, you're going to be okay. So allowing people to be where they are in their grief process. And instead of saying like, you're going to be okay, or like, you're so strong, you'll be fine, or it was just a dog,
Yeah.
or you'll find another
They're in a
lover.
better place.
They're in a better place, or you got another angel. There's so many things that seem good to say, and maybe the first time somebody hears it, it's okay. But you go into a few weeks of grieving, you go into a month of grieving or a year of grieving, and that person's been hearing the same things over and over and over. And then it starts to become this feeling of you more feel like people are telling you to repress how you're feeling. And so I now, when people are dealing with immense grief or immense, and grief doesn't even have to just be death. It can be that they've just had a heavy, heavy year and now they're in a really big grieving process. I don't like to use that concept of like, it's all going to be okay, or you're being watched over all the time, or that, like you're so strong, or you're going to feel good again, or go do this, or go do something that just makes you happy, or go get moving. Like, I like to just be present with them and talk about literally like the small things. Like if they're really going through a lot, be like, "Oh, I'm gonna help do your dishes." Or, "Hey, your car looks dirty. I'm gonna wash it." Like those little things that bring them back into the now, I think are important without telling them how to feel.
Right. And that part's really huge of when you're witnessing someone else be in hardship and deep grief, the triggers that you feel, and then you're wanting them to be better so then everything can be quote unquote normal again or neutral. What you're triggered with is just a fraction of what's actually going on for the other person in that moment. So it's like be with your own discomfort because what's happening within you is just it's not about you for one in that moment. So it's like
Yeah.
your very minor discomfort compared to what this person is experiencing in their full-blown grief. It's like just take a seat.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this, I have a couple moms in my realm that have lost their children. And one of them is my second love that I talked about earlier that had passed when I was about in my mid 20s, maybe a little bit older. Maybe I was more like 27. But what I noticed there was a point where people were uncomfortable being around them because what do you say when a mom loses her kid? Especially when you have single moms, right? And
Mm.
even parents in general. I think there's a lot of isolation when that happens. And because this is something that I've had to ask myself and that I've got to be there for people who are dealing with that type of grief. You're really just sharing the grief with them. You know, if you are around somebody who is deeply grieving and you feel like crying, cry with them. Because you know what that tells them? People have that mirror effect, right?
Hmm.
If you're crying with them instead of just trying to hold it in and be strong for them and tell them it's going to be okay, or like just go back to work and like this will pass. No, like allow your emotions to come up with them because then it allows their mind to be like, oh, this is okay. Nobody's judging me, you know, because humans have this weird mirror effect thing. And then when you're allowing yourself to feel emotions that are authentic around them, you're also helping them process that. Because I think, like, yes, emotions on a science level are like hormones and this, but there's also so much science coming out behind the concept that like emotions are also frequency, which is why we feel things when we listen to different music over and over. It's why there's been sound therapy for so long. And it's also why now there's literally frequency devices that help your body be better in well-being. And from that concept, I like to just really break it down to like how people just do things. And so I think that like when you're around somebody who's immensely grieving and you feel that sense of wanting to cry, instead of what our culture so much tells people to do of like hold it in or people leave or now they can't be around them while they're grieving because it, you know, they feel uncomfortable. It's like, no, feel uncomfortable for a moment, cry with them because I actually think you're helping their system process it.
Yeah, it's that permission slip of like,
Yeah.
so I want to shift into the other topic of discussion for the podcast, and you kind of started to allude to it a little bit of when you were just talking about your siblings and certain experiences of why you started to go to counseling and how that journey started for you.
Yeah.
And you've talked about the topic of domestic violence, which also, I mean, really goes hand in hand with grief too, of
Yeah, that's true.
being within that, and you shared how you grew up witnessing it. So what about that part of your life would you like to share?
I'm going to start at the point where I was like about 11 or 12, you know, when so having a kid young, I read up a lot about like like where we develop emotionally, right?
Yeah.
11 or 12 is this wonderful age where you start realizing, wow, people live differently. I'm different than my family.
Mm,
And so it can show up as like defiance, your kid being super judgy all of a sudden or saying mean things. But really, what's going on is like you're just acknowledging at this age that every household's different. Right. And it's like, it could be pretty mind blowing. I don't know if you remember when you were 11 or 12, but it was about that age when I was like, dude, what is going on with the adults in my life? And
that's
I,
true. You really start to pick up of like, oh, even though if you don't fully understand it, what you're witnessing, if it's not healthy,
yeah,
you understand it on a different level. Even if it's not
yeah,
cognitively yet, you're like,
yes,
something's not right or something's off.
yes, yeah. And so, you know, thankfully I had a mom who had done a fair amount of counseling, but at that time, the therapy world was like, let's crack open your back, what you're repressing and walk you through all of it and give
Yeah.
you pills to help you process it. Don't worry, your family will stay intact, nothing will happen. And that was not the case. But it did give me the concept that, oh, there's people out there who will help me process things. And like counseling and therapy isn't just if you have a mental illness, it literally can just be to help you understand something or to shift something. That's what I got.
Mm.
That if you found the right person, it could help you shift something. And I knew about 12 that I had things that I'd want to get over. I understood that there was like a cycle I wanted to break, but like you said, I couldn't cognitive put it into place. But I felt like there was just always so much tension and chaos around me and like all this unspoken stuff with all the adults all the time. And I just knew like whatever that was, I didn't want that. I didn't want to carry that on. I didn't want to be part of that anymore. And I just felt like it was so unnecessary. And what was I? what was I beginning to understand is that we had some major generational trauma that I wanted to break. And so, you know, I was lucky enough to be in a middle school that had a counselor who like walked around and shared what she did in her office. And I was like, oh, I could get that for free. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to go to therapy all the time while I'm in school because it's free.
What a concept for a child for that to like come across their mind.
I know. But it was also around this time that I understood that I felt really loved, but I felt so let down in a way and unseen. And there was part of me that was kind of like, why? Why do I feel so loved, but yet my parents don't seem to be doing all this stuff other parents are doing? Or why, like, I've been exposed to all this stuff that nobody else has ever even seen.
Right.
But yet I still feel loved. I was like, something is weird here.
That duality.
So, I believe when you share stories of your past and when you, even if you don't share it and you just think of your old self, like send compassion to yourself. So every time I share this story, I'm sending so much compassion to my old self instead of feeling bad for who I was or getting upset at my family or like getting upset at the adults around me. Instead, I send compassion to everybody because at the end of the day, I really believe most people are doing the best they can with the tools they've been given. And so when I was 12 and I went into this therapy thing. I remember sitting there on the couch and she's like, well, how do you feel today? And I was like, oh, my sibling, like they seemed really happy. Like I made breakfast for them. And then she's like, well, how do you feel? And I was like, oh, my brother seemed a little nervous when he was going to school, but I made a little joke and he's fine. She's like, well, how do you feel? And I was like, my dad seems really tired today, but he works a lot. She's like, well, how do you feel? And I was like, my mom's not doing too good because she's going through all this stuff. And like when she takes this one medicine, she sleeps for half the day because that's what it does. And she's like, how do you feel? And I was like, yeah, I think I'm doing okay. I remember like when I look back on it, I'm like, thank the universe for the way this counselor did her practice because she acknowledged that like one, she wasn't like we got to call CPS. One, she acknowledged that like I'm in an okay family. We just had dealt with a lot of heaviness, but it doesn't mean it's horrible. And then two, she had so much patience. And I can look back in my adult eyes and see her smiling and kind of do the head nod, like, uh-huh. But my kid point of view, I like could not express how I felt. I knew how everybody else was feeling, even the animals, but I could not say how I felt.
Wow.
And like, it's just amazing to me. And so that really started my journey with that. And then I started to learn about how, like, okay, actually, all the domestic violence that I grew up around is not normal. And I knew it wasn't accepted, but I didn't know it wasn't not normal.
Hmm.
And there was so many layers in my life to unravel that. I would say that it actually took me all throughout my 20s, or probably till my like late 20s to really step out of that. I'm a big advocate that when somebody's like, "Oh, I'm staying with my partner who's not healthy because we have kids," I'm like, "Don't do it." Like it is so hard, but there are so many resources out there, even if people are scared to go into their community and get resources. And there's so many layers to domestic violence too, because it's like if somebody has a partner who is domestic violence or falls in that category of being an abuser, and they have a job that gives them power in their community, sometimes people don't ever shift things because they're afraid.
Right.
And I'm so thankful to see that there's so much more awareness about domestic violence in the world today. But when I was growing up, there was so much domestic violence around me that I just thought everybody had witnessed it. And then when my mom married one of my siblings' dads and moved us out of Alaska, we went into Olympic Peninsula, Washington. And that's where I spent 12 all the way through my 20s in that area. I still saw domestic violence, but it was a little bit more of that abusive, hush hush, emotional stuff. And like, that's not okay either.
No. Mhm.
And then that area had a lot of like passive aggressiveness. And then in Alaska, when I was growing up, what I had witnessed a lot was a lot of domestic violence. and people either shaming the person who was the victim or people being so passive because they don't know how to deal with that destructive anger that people get when they are an abuser. But it did give me this big perspective of a weird cycle that just recently came back into place. So, one of the first husbands that my mother had, they met very young, and they both came from families with tremendous wounds. They both had a lot of sexual trauma in their background, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of that, like, if you're not doing the right thing, you're going to be shamed and ignored in the family. But doing the right thing was just acting this certain type of way, which also has roots of dysfunction in generational cycles, right? They definitely had a lot of domestic violence. And what I had noticed as I got older, and I would kind of just rethink of little things, is they also had no support, anybody to show them how to be different. So, when like the husband had a hard day, his circle of people were like, let's go drink and blow off steam. But then
Right.
what does that do? Then you come home drunk and your issues with your partner don't go away. Now everything's like you can't filter stuff.
Right. It's just an immediate reaction.
Yes. And then if you have somebody who also has grown up being more physical because of their abuse, now you're just putting people in a situation to have domestic violence. So like I saw so much of that, or I saw at times like one of the guys beating up one of the other moms. And then the cops would come and they'd be like, lady, you're being hysterical. You're acting violent. We're taking you to jail.
Wow.
Like there's so many layers to domestic violence that I'm just happy there's more awareness about it. But it really gave me the fuel, I think, to want to break generational trauma and break the unhealthy cycles that are just normalized. Because so for me, when I've been exposed to really horrific domestic violence where somebody's literally trying to kill somebody in front of children.
Hmm.
And when somebody hasn't been exposed to this, they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah. And then they're just so shocked that I don't always share this story anymore, right? Because I realize when I share different aspects like that, like people can't wrap their mind around what I saw. But then I'm also like, well, that's also why I am the way that I am, but it's also why like even though I love people and I trust people, I'm also not just going to like blindly go do things because I have seen the other part of human beings. And like that's very much a real part of our world, not just even domestic violence. Like you have human trafficking, you have cultures that are very harsh, you have places where like you go into the wrong home, you know,
Hmm.
like there's no forgiving that. And
Right.
it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just a part of human nature that when people don't know how to process and allow things to move in a certain way, it comes up in this very horrific way. As I became expanded more of my emotional intelligence and my understanding of things, what I saw were these people who really could be abusers and like harm somebody in front of somebody else, right? Because like when you're doing like regardless if it's nobody's witnessing or somebody is witnessing it, there's all these different layers to it. But I'm like, this person has to be really effed up to try to kill the kid's mom in front of them. Like that's really bad. And that happened. My mother, unfortunately, was with more than one man that was like that. Um, but she also was somebody who you would say would feed the fire, right? And so then I had people around who were like, "Oh, it's because your mom won't ever be quiet." And I'm like, "Well, that's not okay
That doesn't give an
either."
excuse for the behavior. Yeah.
Like we had some people in the family do this thing of like, we're not going to encourage the kids to see their mom in this good light, but like their dad's doing better. Their dad's not doing drugs or alcohol so much, and their mom's still partying and she's still always speaking her mind. And it's like, dude, actually, none of you are okay. You all need some help. So I have learned that when people are the abuser or the victim, both people are having like this self-worth internal war, right?
Yes.
And when you have two people that have heavy unhealed wounds, either they're going to have to really be mindful and go through a lot of finding resources that work for them to help them heal. Because that can go into like, what's their religion? What's their belief? What's their culture? Like, what's going to work to help them heal those wounds? Or you're going to end up with domestic violence. And so, like, yes, domestic violence is not good. Abusers should not be glorified. Um, but at the same time, they're that way because they weren't given the tools to process stuff. And now they have years and years of more to process.
We have all of that within us,
Yes. Yeah.
like that
Yeah. And I
potential.
actually, and part of where I was saying it's weird to see a whole circle. So one person I was around, the first man I called dad outside of my own, I remember how loving he was with our family. I remember feeling love for him and feeling so safe around him. And I loved what my mom and him were creating. But then I remember these horrific fights, smacking one of my siblings with like a little fishing pole on the back of his legs, like stuff that's not acceptable, but in his mind, it was okay because that's what he had been around. And then, but there was this immense loving side too, right? And obviously, alcohol was a big play, but what's deeper than that is the unprocessed trauma.
Yes.
Throughout his life, as I got older, we would chat because he apologized. He apologized to me once for the trauma he created in my life. And he's like, I'm sorry that me and your mom couldn't figure it out. I've always loved you. And that's huge as an adult, especially a young adult, to get apologies from the people in your life who hurt you. So I was never close again to him, but it gave me a type of like witnessing, right? What are we doing all the time when we are healing? We're just witnessing healing. So
Hmm.
he witnessed the pain he caused, and it got to allow me to release that in a way. I like when you're holding space for somebody grieving, what are you doing? You're just witnessing them, and it allows them to let go of it somehow.
Hmm.
When we are really healing, what are we doing? We're witnessing our wounds, and it's allowing us to transmute it and release it.
Yeah.
So for him, I got to see that point where he acknowledged the hurt he caused and admitted it. And around that time, I had some people in my family like also acknowledge that they just dropped the ball. Because at one point I was like, you guys really baby my brothers, but you forget that like I witnessed all of that. Like you forget that I'm the one who called the police, that I'm the one who like took the newborn out of the house or like rode my bicycle down the road with snow with all my
Hmm.
siblings crying. Like nobody ever adjusted what the women were going through, but they were, like kind of glorifying the men, but demonizing the women, and like women had to be hushed. So there was like this other layer that I was noticing in my family around this time. So to have somebody acknowledge that and say, I'm sorry, yet be somebody who gave me immense trauma, I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
I was like, this is like a lot of weird emotions, a lot of weird things. And like it started opening up these big doors and more duality there. And then, flash forward to nowadays, that same dad couldn't totally break his cycle. And he took his own life recently. And that is still being heavily processed in the family. But at the same time, now that I have all this trauma informed care and this awareness, I'm like, oh, that it makes me feel sad because I think of how much sadness he carried in for years.
Hmm.
And when you aren't able to pause and help yourself process things that are heavy, or you can't look at the heaviness in your life, it starts to compound and compound and compound.
I think about
And
that a lot because I feel like that compound is then what fuels the potential perpetrator within us or the other spectrum of suicide as well. It's like
yeah,
those two things get amplified so much as something that would happen of compounded, unfelt trauma.
yes, yeah. And that's what I have noticed the most with people who are the abuser in domestic violence relationship, or if there's somebody even who feeds the fire. Like there is this huge thing of compound trauma and continuously happening. And then when you have 10 years of, being the woman who's always with the guy who's going to beat you, like, well, whatever now. Or when you have
Yeah.
10 years of beating up your girlfriends because you got too drunk, like, oh, well, I'm just going to try not to drink so much. Like, I'm super sorry. And
And
like,
that there's so much grief to undo that, to break
yeah,
the cycle on both ends, to feel that.
yeah, yeah,
Of feeling that grief to genuinely break the cycle of what keeps happening.
yeah, yeah. And so there's just, a big advocate for like give your children the tools so they can process stuff. And yes, everybody wants to be the most perfect parent, but it's so powerful when you can, if your child comes to you with something, even if it's something you don't want to hear, even if it's your adult child telling you that maybe their spouse hit them, or they're telling you that like there's emotional abuse or some type of abuse going on, or your kid comes to you saying that they've been abused, like to just acknowledge that for a moment really breaks a trauma cycle.
With that, how can people genuinely break that pattern of domestic violence dynamics? Can you kind of like zone in on
Uh,
that a little more?
in my own experience on what really helped me is like when I started that part of adulthood, or when I just started part of that human experience, when we start to fall in love with people and want a relationship and not like your boyfriend in middle school, you might just hold hands and like peck each other.
Hmm.
But when you start crossing bigger things like imagining a life with somebody, um, I had this idea where I was like, oh, I'm just gonna keep a journal of it so I don't repeat the same relationship. Because what I had noticed with a lot of the domestic violence, because I grew up around a fair amount of women that were in domestic violence relationships, or, I remember one time my grandmother was like, Bri, make sure you're always happy and always have your own way. And she one time kind of shared with me, like, yeah, her and my grandpa loved each other, but it was kind of a circumstantial thing that made them choose to get married and live together. And did it help everybody in the long run? Yeah, but I could tell as I got older that it wasn't really where her heart was. It was just like she had so much unprocessed trauma, she couldn't allow herself at time,
Hmm.
however that goes. So from seeing those little tidbits of things, and then also seeing a few people who seemed very healthy in their relationship and felt very empowered or had that content and safety feeling to them, I was like, oh, there's these patterns that people fall into sometimes. And it's just like the same thing over and over and over. And I saw that from having witnessed so many unhealthy relationships or so many unhealthy ways that somebody would react to somebody, that when I started doing my healing, those became my pain points of witnessing stuff because of how it made me feel as a kid. And then when I was processing that, I was like, oh, wow, this is like cycles, just cycles. So I was like, I'm going to keep a journal. And when I think I'm in love with somebody, when I have a boyfriend, when I'm really close, it's like anything huge that happens in my life that makes me feel something good or bad, I'm going to write about. But I really started keeping it when I was about like 16 or 15. There's like 20 years of my life in this one journal. And I saw, I know,
My face, I was like, wait, in one journal?
what I did. It wasn't every day. It was just when
Right.
like big shifts would happen. So I
Wow.
was just like, okay, I know when people make accidents, it's like their emotions are heightened. And so some part of me was like, I'm just going to keep a journal of whenever anything big happens in my life. And my first thought was I knew there was cycles I wanted to break. And I knew these cycles, it wasn't just a word, it was literally cycles, right? And so I wrote about, like how I was feeling with somebody or what I liked or what I didn't like, or like even the dreams that I would have, or like the little stories I told myself about somebody. And then when the next person would come along, I would notice like, am I bringing that over or is this something new? And if it was seemed something similar, then I
Mhm.
just didn't lean into it. It was like, okay, it was just a reminder from the universe of saying like, hey, pay attention to this little thing.
Like you didn't
And
lean
then
into a relationship
yeah,
or
I didn't lean into the relationship or friendship. I just acknowledged that it was triggering something in me that I hadn't processed from before.
mm,
And I saw this come up in like friendships, like, so obviously I had a mother wound. I remember being friends with a woman who reminded me so much of my mom that I didn't want to be around her because it made me slightly uncomfortable and angry. But instead of me leaning out of it, I was like, oh, wait, this gives me the option to heal this a little bit. So I leaned into being friends with her. And she actually, like, that helped me not in a weird way, in an actual way, it helped me because I was able to sit with my uncomfortable emotions. I was able to acknowledge the anger, but now what am I doing? Now I'm forming this new friendship with a woman who really supported me, who gave me these little tidbits of wisdom that I kind of needed to hear. And then what does my mind do, right? Because our mind's very like logical. So now my mind had this imprint of my mother wound, but I allowed somebody who slightly triggered me to come along and give me a better imprint. And now what happens is it like just naturally healed it.
So how do you discern the difference of when you lean in and turn away to not fully repeat a cycle
Yes.
again?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So leaning in versus away, I literally would give myself time limits. So I raised my kid, me and his dad went separate ways when he was about 10 months old. And then we cohabitated for a while, but being very platonic because my family was all in Alaska and I raised my kid in Washington where he was. We really, I really had to practice boundaries a lot. And then I went to massage school, which is another layer of boundaries and ethics. So I like to share that I had this perspective within myself already of like, where are my boundaries? What's my sense of integrity? That is like my moral code. Like that is a huge, huge thing to have. And with from that, it gave like I already had a sense of when my body feels comfortable or uncomfortable because part of me processing that domestic violence, there's a point in my life when I noticed anytime a man touched my arm or somebody got too close to me, specifically my arms, I would like tense up.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, whoa, this is like, I don't even know where this is from. This is like my body doing that.
Yeah.
Or, somebody else who had really hurt my mom. I remember this man walked into the place I was working at, and he looked like that old person who was in my life and who created so much pain and chaos. And I remember I like instantly felt myself just hide. And I was like, oh, this is so weird. What's going on? And I was like, oh my God. So it was like amazing to see that I had created and that was after I was done living with my son's dad, but I had created this safe bubble based off of like what my body felt comfortable with and not comfortable with. But I came from that perspective, I think, because I did dance and then I went right into massage school. So like my body was like a form that I liked to kind of go in and out of, right? And so that is one piece that I would always let lead me. And the way that I knew it was difference between a trigger versus something that could be healthy is I would genuinely just be like, how is this person treating strangers? Do they have a community around them or are they isolated? Because I had noticed a lot of people that were major abusers, not just being a butthead, not just having a bit of PTSD and then occasionally going in the category of an abuser
Hmm.
or occasionally saying really mean things like somebody who's literally tried to take somebody's life or is literally like controlling them. Those people were usually isolated themselves.
And then with
And
that, like I've told myself of people show you who they are early and you need to believe them.
yes, yes. And so that's the other part of it is like, the people that helped me, that came my way, that helped me kind of work through my triggers or to make sure I wasn't repeating my own cycle when I was in that healing process. One, I won't ever put myself in a situation if my body doesn't feel comfortable. That was something that was honestly really taught to me from my parents. I grew up on the whole thing of like, don't ever go next to a van. If somebody really wants to hurt you, they can. You pay attention to your surroundings. And that has literally saved me more than once because for a different time, I have a couple stories of literally almost being human trafficked when I was in my early 20s. And so it's like these things are very real. And a big part that has been my guide is understanding when my body is comfortable versus not comfortable.
Yeah.
And now when you're in the beginning of healing, like how I shared, there was a point where, you know, that friend made me uncomfortable because she triggered my mom one or that other when I was noticing when men would touch my shoulders or too close, even men that I trusted, my whole body would go really tight. How I leaned into that is I just chose people that I was forming a friendship with that were in my life that I felt a draw to. But what I noticed is they had those things that other people felt safe around them too. And like the first person that I was intimate with that I genuinely felt really safe with, I kind of asked around about them. Like people, they had a little reputation. And even though they might have had a reputation of like liking a lot of different girls, nobody ever said anything mean about them. And so for me, I was like, okay, that's enough because like I'm not looking to have like a partner or get married or have another kid with somebody. Like I genuinely want to experience my intimate sexual self with somebody who feels safe. and somebody
Mhm.
who's not pushing me this way or telling me to be this way or this way or, getting me pregnant. Like
Mhm.
there's all these layers. So that first person, like, is when I also learned that my body wasn't always comfortable. And I remember one time he was like, Bri, even when we're just laying next to each other, like just cuddling, watching a movie, sometimes your body gets really tight. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what that's about.
And that's the part of the healing too, so you can discern the difference between discomfort and unaligned, like uncomfort and unalignment. Like, 'cause you're
Yes.
not always going to be super comfy cozy because as we're relational creatures, it's going to bring things up. But then as it's a
Yes.
continued safe person, it's okay to
Yeah.
co-regulate, like you've said. But I really like the point that you made with at the beginning of relating to people again, and you're trying to understand and break certain abusive patterns that you've either grown up in or been in within yourself, is to notice how people treat strangers. Like that's a very good point of
Yeah.
that right there is evidence. Like that is how they are. And if something is off in your body and you just have this knowing of I don't have to know all the answers, but I know I don't like that. Something is very unsettling for me. Trust
Yeah.
that.
Yes. And I would even describe it as kind of like, so, I was sharing that as saying like, this is when I felt uncomfortable, but I wasn't feeling yucky. I was just uncomfortable. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what that is. And I was with somebody who was safe, who was like, well, it's okay.
Yeah.
And we didn't feed it. And eventually it allowed me to like play in this safe space of just allowing my body to relax because ultimately I was taught that like men weren't safe, right? Then on the other part of that, I remember being around a group of guy friends, and like one guy would be really rude to a stranger, and I would get this yucky feeling in my body. And that gave me the perspective like that yucky feeling, or like when your breath is like super fast, or you're just like hyper focused on what somebody just did. Like, don't tuck that away. That is a red flag. And so many of us just tuck it away. Like, other people I've talked to, like, thankfully, I haven't ever been physically abused, but I've been in emotional abusive stuff. But the women I've talked to that have gone through abuse, or even the men, there's a point where, like, they notice something to where you're like, well, that's a little crazy, but you just kind of tuck it away because we're taught to be
And
polite.
that happens at the beginning. It
Yes.
happens soon and
Yeah.
fast. Like that's what I'm saying. For me, I was
Yes.
like, oh my gosh, that's the paying
Yes.
attention. And I'm seeing that repeat now in my life. I'm like, you know what? Thank you. You showed me now at the beginning, and that's all I need to know. And I don't, that's the for me, that's that I don't need to lean into that. I've seen
Yep.
enough in my past life and current life. When I see that again, and it's that, I'm like, you showed me who you are.
Yeah.
Bless, and I'm not going to choose that
Yeah.
again.
Yep. I always have that thing of like love, like life is crazy enough. We're gonna all face hard things. We're all gonna face death, change, things not going as planned. We're gonna all face a little bit of being sick at the wrong time,
Mm,
plans changing. Like love does not need to be hard, just like friendship. And that's another concept is like
yeah.
I've always felt like when we share ourselves with somebody with a lover, it should unfold easy like friendship.
Mm,
There shouldn't be this thing of like chasing them or over analyzing all the time. It's just like you're happy to be around them and who they are to other people in the world. Like you're proud of them for that way. And I think that's another thing. Like if you don't like the way you're hearing stories come up of somebody or how they are with strangers, or you hear about them going out with their friends or other friends and they're doing these things, and then you talk to them about that and it's a real story and it doesn't feel good to you, those are also red flags
yes.
because that means they're not in alignment with how your moral code is or your sense of integrity.
Hmm.
And our friends that are friends with us for life, we don't even question those things. We just naturally process them and let things stay close or fall off. But
Right.
our love life has so much attachment into it that it can get a little messier. So the stranger thing was one. And then, like, let's say, I also did something where I was like, let's say I met somebody and it like stirred up all that really good chemistry and I just didn't want to let it go. Well, I would give myself like, I read a thing about how when we first meet somebody, it's like 3 month increments. and you learn different things on an emotional psychology level. So
Hmm.
I also just was like, I'll go on a couple dates with somebody. If I can tell that there's not just that connection that I look for, like also in yourself, decide what does that connection feel like in your body versus, for me, there's different layers. Like, and I became aware of this when I was really young and I was kind of reading different things and just thinking about like, how am I attracted to people? How does love feel to me? It
Mhm.
was literally like, okay, I find a lot of people attractive. I'm not going to want to sleep with all of them.
Right.
I might even like visit with somebody and get like the little excited feelings and I'm like getting all giddy. Doesn't mean I'm going to sleep with them. There's all these different layers of finding somebody attractive, feeling attractive when you're around them, finding them attractive. And then there's this layer where it's like, okay, there's an unspoken dialogue going on. I feel like they're tuned into me, I'm tuned into them. And that's what I've waited for is like what you might hear people refer to as like a soul connection. But I've tried really hard not to let my mind go into like over fantasizing stuff, right? Because when you
Right.
go in the soul connection, the twin flame, the soul family stuff, I agree with all that. But I also think our human mind likes to over fantasize things and create a story out of a sense of wanting control again.
And then you're
So,
attacked.
yes, and then your attachment kicks in and it might block how your body's feeling.
Yeah.
So for me, I was just like, okay, I know that there's different layers of when I'm attracted to somebody. And there is only certain layers that I'm going to feel comfortable sharing myself at with somebody. And I know regardless if I share with somebody when I'm at this point, I'm not going to regret it, even if the relationship starts to shift. And so I kind of made this little pact with myself, and it came from an unhealed version of me, but I still like to share it when somebody is healing, specifically if they're like dealing with not creating unhealthy cycles in their love life and they come from a past like I did with a lot of domestic violence. This helped my little radar so much that I was like, do I genuinely feel love for this person? That even if I wasn't in their life, I would still love them. And then also, like, do I feel good enough around them that I would be okay fully experiencing myself with them? But if I don't talk to them anymore, would I still be proud of myself for that decision? Because it's something I personally want to experience. And that was my little like radar thing. So I had a couple men come in my life so my son, how I raised him is I didn't raise anybody affecting our sacred home until he was like older. So my son only remembers two men that I tried to build a life with and another that was around for a lot. And then he didn't see me kiss anybody until he was like 7 or 8. But it's because there's something so powerful of keeping your home sacred. And that goes into breaking cycles too. Like if somebody comes into your home and they leave and your home feels really chaotic and dysregulated, maybe don't invite them over for a little bit so you can place what it was. Either it triggered something in you or it's their energy they're bringing. But like your home should be your place of refuge. And I strongly, strongly believe that. And if you have these boundaries within yourself, within your home, guess what? Then people have to kind of filter through little things that help you pause. So, like, find those little things that will help you hold to your boundaries that you want to have, but you're also coming from a space of wanting to grow and change and expand, right? Because if you come from a space of wanting to stay safe and control everything, then you're going to start blocking people out of your life with those boundaries.
Then
But
you're
if you
coming
come
out
from
of
a
the
place of
womb.
wanting to expand and grow, then you're coming from this place of like, okay, I'm open to this person feeling safe in my home. I'm open to this person not feeling safe. So I'm not going to invite them over because it did something weird. Oh, well,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, because if you're that controlling, then you're operating off of a wound. And it's only a matter
Yeah.
of time that you'll repeat some kind of pattern in a different way
Yeah.
anyway. That
Yeah.
kind of goes into the last question within this topic of how somatic work has been supportive during this process.
Yeah. So somatic work really helped me be more in tune with my body to understand how was the yes or no showing up in my body. Like, okay, when I'm feeling this, it's because it's literally attached to this old wound that always shows up in this place. Or If I feel anxious, anxiety is such one of the easiest emotions to transmute because usually when we're feeling anxious, a bit of movement just helps our body relax and then our mind's able to relax. Or
Mm,
you're moving your body in certain ways and then your mind's able to release the hormones that your body's needing so you don't feel anxious. So somatic activated healing has helped me tremendously just by the concept of I can now see when my body feels something or I feel a sensation of what's going to help me immediately feel better. But the other part of that is that pause. So I can ask myself, like, where's the sensation coming from? Is it the person I'm around? Is it what I went and did? Am I not getting enough sleep? Did I just put myself in a very intense environment where I slightly put myself in fight or flight because as a species, we're always wanting to stay alive. So is that why I'm feeling this way? Or is it that I triggered something? So you get used to kind of just acknowledging your inner world. And that helped me really to tune in on like knowing what might always trigger me from the trauma I've seen, but seeing how that gets better. And now what happens is like, if I'm triggered, the amount of time that I might feel that sensation is very, very, or when I go through grief and I'm feeling extremely heavy, as I've used more somatic concepts in my life and sit with what it's actually doing and how I'm processing it, my window of being in these dysregulated, uncomfortable moments are like smaller and smaller.
that
And
window
then,
is smaller because your window of tolerance is bigger and being able to handle discomfort and triggers and being in your body through the whole process.
yeah, yeah,
And that's the paradox of like, oh, if I increase my window of being able to be with discomfort to not stay in damaging spots, because that's not it. It's to be present. So then that wave gets to be shorter, or you get to discern the difference. There's cat food automatic things happening right
oh,
now. I don't know if you heard that. Okay. And then but when that discomfort's here, like you said, yeah, we get to feel it, be with it, and then we get to move on instead of being stuck in it or lost or confused and in that fog.
yeah. And when your threshold expands, I've always said like, oh, compassion heals the world. Like self-compassion, compassion
Yeah.
would literally heal the world because it also gives you this thing where even if you are being petty, you know it's temporary
Yeah.
and you're not gonna like hate yourself over it. You're just being gonna be like, oh my gosh, I'm being really petty right now. Like, I don't really like this, but it'll pass. Like
Hmm.
having that compassion for your threshold is amazing when you learn to grow your threshold because then it does this funny thing where you're like, oops, made the wrong decision there. Like, it'll be okay.
Yeah, and you get to,
Yeah.
yeah, instead of like beating yourself up every time, like you get to move forward and then
Yeah.
forgiveness comes in.
Yeah.
So you kind of already shared it at the beginning, but just to reiterate, like all of your offerings, way that people can get in contact with you, and yeah, what you're here to support others in.
So I'm here very much supporting others and learning how to expand in their self to where you're able to process grief and those heavy life chapters. And really, what it's doing is connecting you to your deep sense of peace and that soul connection. Like, there's something so powerful when you have first ever felt that very deep sense of peace and connection where everything feels good, everything feels as it should. It gives you this clarity in your mind and your body that is so just peaceful. Like, and there's something that happens when you play more and more with that is like you're not analyzing things so much anymore. Like there's not all this noise in your mind all the time. For me, the main form is the somatic activated healing or somatic classes. But you get to experience that with me in retreats or my one-on-one expansion container. And I also, if we're in the same areas, I'm regularly in Hawaii. This is where I live at, but I also visit Alaska and Washington. I also do a more intensive integrated massage where you come in and you get the body work done. You get some energy work done. And then we also end with a saw session on what I feel like will help you. So then you can just bring that home and have this little routine.
Do
So, but
you
everything's,
create
yeah.
that in the moment of the saw session after the massage or?
I created it with one of my old clients. I could tell that that somatic activated healing would just be really helpful. And I said, "Hey, you have a really long massage book today. Would you like to integrate some Reiki and energy work? And then I'll turn on my little frequency thing." She was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And then she was like, "Whoa." And then she came the next time. She's like, "Wow." She's like, "I've had so many breakthroughs." She's like, "There's all this stuff going on." She's like, "Let's do it again." And so we spent like 6 months with these type of sessions.
Mm,
And then I was like, wow, this is literally like all my career gifts being put into one thing. And like, if somebody's ready to have a major, major shift, all of them will do that. But this one's very physical also because you're getting the massage with it.
yeah.
Um, and then that one-on-one expansion, like people who did that, I remember they'd be like, well, my dreams are different. They're like, I'm having a clear sense on this. Or they're like, wow, this person I thought that was like my lifetime lover, I kind of now see that it was just this old wound. And I'm like, yep.
That'll do it.
And then when you're able to transmute things, you see these huge things, bud. And then the retreat, the retreat is I have it small and intimate and like very planned out in the background where you're unwinding, you're getting centered into your body. Then you're allowing things to shift. And now we're kind of in this blissful point and reflecting. But another piece of that you get is like everybody's in a group. So my nervous system is also integrated into everything. Because some retreats, people will stay really separate from everybody.
Mhm.
But because of probably all the mothering in my background, I was like, we're all going to do things together in circle.
Yeah.
But on a human level, it's literally helping your nervous system co-regulate because you have another frequency there. And then that other nervous system is like, oh, hey. So the retreat is a lot of fun. Right now I have books open for February, and then I'm working for events in Washington and Alaska. And that you come in, we do daily somatic class. You also get local excursions. I have local guest guide come in for cultural experiences. And it's just when you go on a retreat, it immediately takes you out of your comfort zone. And so one thing about retreats is it takes you out of your comfort zone. So your mind's automatically like, whoa, everything's a little different. What's going on here?
Hmm.
But it allows you to make new connections in your mind very fast because you're out of your comfort zone. So
Yes.
when we have a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of dysregulation, it opens up these points to where we can like make it all smooth again and very regulated. Ironically, it goes into that polarity thing that you're talking about. And it also goes into literally how our bodies deal with scar tissue.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes so people can check it out, see where you're at, even on socials, everything to be in your orbit, receive the medicine that you have to give, and all of that. And final question, what are some ways that you create light?
I love creating like just by showing up and allowing myself to fully be there.
Mm,
I come from a long line of just doing hospitality work. And so one of the jobs that I'll pick up occasionally is being like a hostess, or I was a barista a long time. Like, you know what I love about those jobs? I'm just getting to show up as I am
yeah.
and I'm just visiting with people. And so, or even having the beach day with a friend or going and like hanging out with my family and just eating food. Like, I love sharing light just by really being present with somebody when they're right in front of me. Like when I go to the grocery store, I'm not just checking out. I'm like smiling at the person,
Hmm. Yeah.
and I'm allowing my energy to just be a little open. There's the other side of that is like I'm not afraid of anything hurting me because I know I have all the tools to protect me energetically and physically. And so sharing these favorite parts of myself through that smile, through saying hi, to just being present. Or if I want to say something funny, I say something funny. Or if I get the feeling to like comment about something, I'll comment about it. It's like that's how I love sharing light. It's just being extremely present with the people around me and the people that come into my orbit.
And when you were sharing that, like a rainbow orb thing was like on your forehead. So just so everyone needs to know that that's listening, that may not be watching, as she was talking about creating light, then yeah, a rainbow was on her forehead. Well, thank you with all of that. Thank you all for listening. And remember, when we see the light in ourselves, we create light in others.